Hello, this is Randy. Welcome back to another edition of Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. I wanted to tell you a couple stories from my scouting days. I got into a position after I'd worked with the boys for a few years where I was soon what they called a unit commissioner and then a district commissioner, where I was teaching others how to be successful scout leaders. It was interesting. But the more I trained, the more trainings they would invite me on. I even went to things called like Train the Trainer. Eventually started teaching what they called youth protection, which was how to prevent child sexual abuse from happening while we were in scouting. We always had a rule where the boys were never to be alone with another leader. It was always what we called too deep leadership. Now, that doesn't sound too hard to do, except some people get lazy. One of the leaders that I had later on told me a story that he would never allow any boys to go on an overnight hike unless they had already passed off their first aid merit badge, which is not an easy task. So they had to first pass off the first aid part of being a scout, I believe in the first class rank. Then they had to do the merit badge. I asked him, why do you do that? He said, I don't know. I just feel it's important. One day he took these boys up on a hike on Mount Graham, and the two leaders, one would take the boys and show them the right way to go. Since he was older, he would always take up the rear, though he was probably in better shape than the guy leading the boys. In crossing a creek, he slipped. He fell and hit his head. He was bleeding quite profusely. There were only two boys back there with him, and the one was told to run ahead and get the boys and bring them back with their leader. The other boy literally had to pull him out of the water, which could have drowned him if he had passed out. He didn't completely pass out, but he was bleeding into the water. This boy, it took all he could do to get him out of the water. So it was basically his body was still in the water. His head was out of the water. Then he was able to properly bandage this head until the other scout leader came back. And that was the end of their trip because he had to go to the hospital. So they got him down the trail and he went to the hospital. After this had happened, I said, so now do you know why you did that? I guess I do. Because that boy didn't panic. He knew what to do. He knew how to wrap his head and keep him from bleeding too much. I don't know if you know much about head wounds. They bleed a lot. Got a lot of blood vessels around our brain. But a couple things I used to always say was never trust a skinny chef, because I taught cooking in these trainings. Tried to improve the quality of food that the men were eating, that the boys would therefore see, and show them that they could be a little creative. The other thing I always said was that if you wanted to keep something a secret, publish it. Now, this is before we had search engine optimization and Google, but I got to be honest with you. I still think one of the best ways to keep something a secret is to publish it. But now that we have artificial intelligence, you can search with ChatGPT or Copilot or something like that. Maybe you'll find it. But I often found that just being able to print something and have it hidden in a book meant most people weren't going to get very far, especially if it was in like the second chapter. I know that's terrible, but it's true. Most people don't spend a lot of time digging into the details. Have you ever met anybody that knew a lot of knots, for instance? In scouting, I think we the boys learn like 6, 7 knots. I've had men come in to teach knot tying. They'd tell me they knew 40 from memory. I was just kind of blown away by that. But then they'd show me all the different uses for those. I know my dad knew more knots than I did because of when he was in the Navy and as a fisherman. He also used knots. I have friends that are surgeons. They know knots and use certain knots that most other people don't ever use because they don't slip. They're tying things off in their sutures. They don't want those to slip. So I guess my point is, if you want to keep something a secret, I still say publish it. Better yet, publish it in a written form. Don't make it available digitally and nobody will find it. The interesting thing about that is that we have lots of things that we try not to share. But then there are lots of things that we want to share. When I was a scout leader, I could take a new leader Didn't matter if they're Boy Scout or Cub Scout leader, Varsity Scout, Explorer Scout leader. I could give them 3 months of programs to get them started. But most of them used the first lesson and then tried to wing it from there, instead of realizing they had another 12 weeks beyond that if it was 3 months total. I think sometimes we don't look at what we really have. I know when I read something, I read to understand it. And if it's something I'm going to have to go back and discuss, I'll read it and take notes. Then I might read it again. But most people, they skim it. That's as far as they get. So I guess my point here is, how are you studying? And our church just had a general conference this last weekend. I listened to all 5 sessions. I went back through and was looking at some of the notes I'd made. And I realized I must have slept through this one guy's talk. Sorry. I guess I'm going to have to listen to that one again, because I could not tell you what he talked about. What I like to do is, when they tell me who's going to talk, I like to make sure I know who they are, know a little bit about their background, what they did for a living, and then try and take a few notes on what they're telling us. My wife and I also watch all of the talks again, and then we read them again. Now, that isn't a lot of dedication. I know people that study them. If you listen to the general authorities of my church, they study each other's words, especially the words of the apostles and the members of the First Presidency. It's incredible how they'll quote something someone has said from 20 years before. But in our church, we believe that the members of the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidencies are prophets, seers, and revelators. And therefore, we want to study what they're saying and hopefully learn from them. I know that I have a long way to go, but like I say, never trust a skinny chef. And if you want to keep something secret, publish it, hopefully just in book form. But in all seriousness, if you want to teach somebody, let's say you have 100 people and you want to teach them all how to do a certain craft or art, you write a detailed description on how to do it. It's more than 5 steps. Most people won't ever get through the 3rd step. So you can hide a lot in the rest of it. In fact, once they get going, they just start going. I can't tell you, I mean, when I worked as a mechanic, I had people that worked with me that would take things apart and put it back together and say, well, it went back together fine, but then I've got these bolts. I'm not sure where they go. Well, then you have to take it all apart and figure out what they missed. We do things quite a bit differently now. When I was a boy, carburetors had to be rebuilt. You could buy a new one, or you could buy a bigger one or a different one. But generally, carburetors had to be rebuilt. Part of that was because they'd get clogged and dirty. The floats would leak. The jets would get clogged. And the same thing happened with spark plugs and spark plug wires, distributor caps. Now everything is run by a computer. We have fuel injection. And I'm just not sure that most of the time we know what we're doing. We just kind of I know in my car, it's so complicated. I take it to a mechanic. I have a good mechanic. I have a couple of good ones. I trust him. The other day I was talking to my son-in-law. He was telling me, I think this is what's wrong with your car. I'm thinking, well, great. I'll go tell my mechanic that. I'm not going to take it apart at this stage. I'm not going to, getting down to look at something on my car is easy. Getting back up, that's hard for me. My back is bad. My knees are bad. When I was younger, it wasn't ever a problem. Now it's a problem. I'm sure part of that's aging and part of it's genetics. But my whole point is, one, I'm shocked at all these good-looking chefs that are on the Cooking Channel and the Food Network. I find it terribly depressing. I don't know how they do that. And the other thing is, their food's so good, do they ever eat it? I'm not sure they do. Could be. Thanks for listening to me. Never trust a skinny chef. And if you want to keep something a secret, publish it. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you for making the time to listen to this. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. And if you can, leave us a comment. Thank you.